His first wife went to a court in 1999 and wrote 6 words in a legal document that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He threatened me with an accident. Sit with that. Not he threatened to hurt me. Not he said he was going to kill me. Not even something vague like he scared me or I feared for my safety. He threatened her with an accident. That's a very specific kind of threat. It has a structure to it. It has a built-in cover story already attached. It's not saying I will harm you. It's saying something will happen to you and nobody will be able to prove it was me because it will look like an accident. Her name is Elizabeth Hoseth. She was Brian Hooker's first wife. She filed that protective order in October of 1999, months after their divorce. She described years of him kicking her, pushing her down, spitting on her, destroying furniture in rages, rocking chairs, telephones, marks on the walls. And then, on October 2nd, 1999, he threatened her with an accident. She got out. She got her protective order. She moved on. And then Lynette came along. And in April of 2026, Brian Hooker told investigators that his wife Lynette died in an accident. My name is Crimetage, and I need to tell you what I actually think about all of this. Before I get into the document, 2 things happened this week that matter. The Coast Guard released body cam footage of the moment they seized the soulmate. Brian and Lynette's sailboat, the boat they'd been living on for years, the boat with the $33,000 FLIR thermal camera mounted on the mast that Brian apparently never mentioned to a single investigator. You can now watch agents board it, walk through it, document it, take it into federal custody. That footage existed since May. They released it now, in July. Federal agencies don't share things randomly. They release things when they want to send a message. And I think the message right now is pretty clear, especially given that Brian Hooker's current location is genuinely unclear. A source told Fox News he may have crossed the California-Mexico border. His own stepdad mentioned a remote cabin in the California mountains, completely off the grid, no electricity, no phone, and that Brian always talked about wanting to live that way. The Coast Guard releasing that footage now feels like a reminder. We have your boat. We have everything on it. This is not going away. But the body cam footage isn't what I want to spend this video on. The document is. Let me tell you who Brian Hooker actually is, not just who he's been since April, but across the full arc of his life. Because when you look at the whole picture, something becomes very clear. This is not a man with one bad chapter. He was fired from AT&T. The reason he was caught manipulating the GPS on his company van, masking his location, making the records show something different from where he actually was. Think about what that behavior is at its core. It's not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's a sustained, deliberate effort to control what other people can verify about your movements. He knew how location tracking worked. He understood the system well enough to manipulate it. And when he got caught, he didn't adjust. He lost the job and fell into a deep depression, medicated, barely functional, Lynette coming home from work to find him on the couch day after day. And then years later, he and Lynette bought a sailboat and went to sea. Now, federal investigators pull GPS data from his devices and find it directly contradicts everything he told them about where he was the night Lynette disappeared. His phone recorded 2 deliberate circles in the water at 2 separate locations. His watch tracked movement that doesn't match any version of a man helplessly drifting in rough seas. His AI search history shows him using Gemini to construct fake maps and send them to investigators. This is not a man who changed. This is a man who got better at not getting caught. There's a specific type of person who, when caught doing something wrong, doesn't recalibrate, doesn't step back and say, okay, that was a mistake, I need to change something. Instead, they just get better at not getting caught. The behavior doesn't stop. the concealment improves. Brian Hooker got caught at AT&T. He lost the job. And then he built a life on a boat in international waters, specifically outside the jurisdiction of any single state. With a $33,000 thermal camera he never mentioned to investigators, and an intimate working knowledge of how marine tracking systems operate. He knew what AIS was. He knew how it worked. He knew that boats in the Bahamas can go dark and there's limited infrastructure to notice immediately. When the Soulmate's AIS signal went dark on the night of April 4th at 9:29 in the evening and didn't come back until the next morning, that wasn't a technical glitch. The system was deliberately turned off by someone who understood how it worked. He knew how to make himself invisible. He'd been practicing since AT&T. I want to talk about the depression, too, because I think it gets mentioned as background detail and then dropped, and it actually matters more than people give it credit for. When Brian got fired from AT&T, he fell apart. Deep depression, medication therapy, Lynette coming home from work every day to find him on the couch, unable to function. His own family has described how bad it was, how long it lasted. And what I think about is what that period meant for their relationship. Because in that window, Lynette was the breadwinner. Lynette was the functional one. Lynette was carrying both of them. And when someone holds you up through something that dark, when someone stays through that level of inability to function, there's a debt that builds, a kind of ownership, a dynamic that calcifies in ways that are hard to break later. By the time Brian was healthy again, by the time they sold everything and bought the Soulmate and went to sea, Lynette had already proven she would stay through the worst of him. She had already demonstrated that her loyalty had limits that were very, very hard to find. And maybe he knew that. And maybe he counted on it. And maybe that's why when she bought that plane ticket home in March, it wasn't the first time she'd tried to leave. And it wasn't the first time he'd talked her back. The people closest to Brian Hooker across different stages of his life. Look at them. Elizabeth Hoseth, his first wife, filed a protective order and told a court he threatened her with an accident after years of physical and emotional abuse. His son from that marriage changed his last name, doesn't go by Hooker anymore, chose a completely different identity, specifically to distance himself from his father. When your own child looks at the name you gave them and decides they'd rather be someone else, that's not a minor thing. That's a person making a permanent statement. His stepdaughter, Carly, who he raised from age 3, hasn't heard from him in months. Not a call, not a text, not a message through anyone. And she said publicly that she wasn't surprised this was happening, that he had threatened to throw Lynette overboard before, that she'd been watching this build and dreading the moment it arrived. His own stepdaughter, not surprised. His neighbor, Jordan Plentz, who lived directly across the street, told reporters that Lynette's mother had warned people Brian was abusive, that Lynette kept leaving and going back, that the pattern was clear to anyone watching closely enough. Marnie Stevenson, one of Lynette's closest friends, said something this week that I keep returning to. She said not one person, not one associate, not one connection that anyone has found has said anything nice or redeeming about Brian Hooker. Not one. 3 months of intensive media coverage. Reporters talking to everyone who ever knew him. And nobody, not a single person, has stood up with a counter-narrative. Nobody has said, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the whole story. Nobody has come forward to defend him. Just silence where the defenders should be. And a growing list of people from across his entire life pointing in the same direction. Now let me come back to the word. because it keeps coming back to me. Accident. Brian Hooker was fired for manipulating GPS on his work van. He told investigators his wife's death was an accident. His first wife told a court in 1999 that he threatened her with an accident. The same word, in different contexts, across different decades, with different people. An accident threat is not an impulsive threat. When someone loses their temper and screams, "I could kill you," that's usually just rage, just words. Ugly, frightening, but words. An accident threat is different. It describes a future event with a cover story already built into it. It requires the imagination of planning. It says, "I will do something to you that nobody will be able to prove was me." Elizabeth Hoseth understood that distinction. That's why she used that specific word in her filing. She wasn't describing someone who threatened her in a rage. She was describing someone who told her, calmly enough to be chilling, that they would arrange something that looked like an accident. And now his wife of 25 years is missing in shallow water in the Bahamas, and the official designation of the investigation is possible foreign murder disguised as a boating accident. I'm not going to say the obvious thing out loud. I don't need to. You already said it yourself. Here's something else worth saying out loud. Brian Hooker sat down for 3 television interviews in the Bahamas after he got out of custody. NBC, CBS, ABC, he said on camera that he would never leave the Bahamas without Lynette, that it would take a higher power to get him out of there, that finding his wife was his only focus. While he was saying that on camera, he was simultaneously at the U.S. consulate arranging an emergency passport. He flew home the next day. I keep going back to that sequence because it's not just inconsistent. It's not just suspicious. It's a complete parallel operation. He was performing grief and urgency for the cameras in one room while handling his actual exit logistics in another at the same time, on the same day. That's not someone in shock. That's not someone whose emotions are scrambled by trauma and not thinking clearly. That's someone running 2 tracks simultaneously and keeping them separate. That's someone who understands the performance that is required of him and is executing it while also executing the practical thing he actually needs to do. That's premeditation. Not of the crime necessarily. I don't know when or how that was planned, but of the aftermath, of what the story needed to look like, of what he needed to appear to be while he arranged to be somewhere else. Cascade of failures, he called it. Let me tell you what Lynette's own words tell us, because she left some behind. In 2024, she texted Marnie Stevenson. She wrote, "It was real bad. I can't be out there with him. It was real bad." And then she went back out there with him. And in January of 2026, 3 months before she disappeared, Lynette told her daughter Carly that Brian had threatened to throw her overboard. Not implied it, not joked about it, threatened it. And Carly reported that Brian himself had said, and I want you to hear this exactly, that he wished he had finished the job. Finished the job. Those words were spoken about a previous incident, an earlier moment when something physical had happened between them. He wished he had finished it. I don't know what that previous incident was. I don't know the full context. What I know is that a man said those words to his wife months before she went into the ocean. And those words are in testimony that federal investigators have access to. Finish the job. And then in April in the Bahamas, his story is that she fell off the dinghy and the water took her. An accident. That word again. There's something else that's been bothering me, and I want to say it because I think it deserves to be said. Marnie Stevenson compared this case to Gabby Petito this week, and she's right. The cases are structurally almost identical. Man and woman go on a trip together. Woman ends up missing. Man uses digital devices to cover his tracks. Man runs back to family. Friends and family come forward with a history of abuse. Police search for a body. The difference is Gabby Petito was 22 years old. Lynette HOOKER was 55. And the coverage has been a fraction of what Gabby got. The public outrage has been smaller. The urgency in the media has been lower. And that's something worth sitting with because Lynette deserves the same attention. She was someone's mother, someone's daughter. She called the ocean her happy place, and she meant it, and she built an entire life around proving that she meant it. She sold her house, gave away most of what she owned, got on the Soulmate, and sailed because that was the life she wanted. In photo after photo, in video after video, she looked genuinely free out there. Like someone who had made the decision most people only talk about making and never do. And in March, 2 months before she disappeared, she had bought a plane ticket home to Michigan. She was planning to leave. Something made her cancel it. Something made her stay. Her last Instagram post on the morning of April 4th said not going anywhere for a while. That night, she was gone. There's something Brian said in a recorded phone call that I've been thinking about. He described what happened that night as a cascade of failures. Cascade of failures. That's engineering language. That's how you describe a bridge collapse or a software system going down. It's clinical. It's detached. It describes a sequence of mechanical events, not the night your wife of 25 years went into the ocean and didn't come back. People who are genuinely devastated by loss talk about the person, about what they've lost, about who is gone. They don't reach for systems analysis language. Cascade of failures. He said that about the night Lynette disappeared. And I noticed it. And I haven't been able to unnotice it. And here's the thing about the people who have stayed silent. When a story is wrong about someone, the people who know that person speak up. They can't help themselves. When someone they care about is being portrayed falsely in the media, the instinct is to say something, to push back, to offer a different perspective, to say that's not who he is. Nobody has said that about Brian Hooker. His lawyers have issued statements, but his lawyers are paid to issue statements. That's different from a friend stepping forward, different from a colleague, different from anyone in his life saying, actually, let me tell you the Brian I know. 3 months, thousands of articles, hundreds of social media posts, one of the most covered true crime cases of the year. And not one person who knows Brian Hooker personally has come forward to offer a positive word about him. That silence is its own kind of testimony. The morning of April 4th, Lynette posted to Instagram. She wrote, "Not going anywhere for a while. It sounds like contentment, like someone settling in for a good stretch in a place they love, like someone who has finally found their pace." She had no idea. And I think about what it means that her last public words were about staying, about not going anywhere. And then she was gone before morning. I think about Darlene, her mother, 76 years old, who has been asking for information about her daughter for 3 months and getting fragments and silence and court documents and no body and no closure. Who gave her Dina to the Coast Guard? Who gave dental records? Who walked shorelines in the Bahamas hoping to find something? No parent should do any of that. No parent should have to sit in that particular kind of not knowing where you've been told your child is probably dead, but you don't have the thing that lets you say goodbye. Darlene has been doing that for 3 months, and Brian Hooker has been in California or Michigan or Oregon, or somewhere off the grid with no phone and no electricity. Somewhere nobody can find him. His wife's mother is walking shorelines in the Bahamas. He is somewhere in the continental United States, apparently trying very hard not to be located. I don't have the words for what that says about who he is. I think you do, though. One thing I haven't addressed yet that I want to spend a minute on is the nobody question, because I get asked about it in comments constantly. People ask whether there can be a prosecution without finding Lynette. And the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. That's settled law. It's been settled for decades. Nobody prosecutions happen. They succeed. Scott Peterson was convicted without Lacey's body being found at the scene of the crime. There are dozens of cases. But the more important thing I want to say about it is this. The absence of a body in this case is not an accident either. The missing weight belt, the missing BCD with the weights built into it, the missing torpedo engine, the heavy equipment that would keep something on the bottom of shallow water in a sea that is, in most places, 8 to 15 feet deep and clear enough to see the bottom from the surface. If Lynette simply fell off the dinghy in shallow, calm water, her body would have been found in the first search. The Sea of Abaco is not the open ocean. It's a protected, shallow body of water that people describe as a giant bathtub. You don't drift away and disappear there without help. The cadaver dog searched the dinghy after it sat in a climate-controlled warehouse for 7.5 weeks. No alert, which means if Lynette was in that dinghy at all, she was there for less than 3 hours, which means Brian's story about her falling off the dinghy and him trying to save her for hours doesn't match the evidence. She wasn't in the dinghy. But she's also not floating anywhere in the Sea of Abaco, which means something kept her down. And the equipment that could have done that is missing from the soulmate. That's not an accident either. Here's where things stand right now. The investigation is still running. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He denies everything. His attorney says he had nothing to do with Lynette's disappearance, and under American law, he is presumed innocent. I believe in that principle, even in cases that look like this one. Presumption of innocence exists because the alternative is worse. I don't want to live in a world where people get convicted in comment sections. But here's what I also believe. Patterns mean something. Words mean something. A woman going to a court in 1999 and writing that her husband threatened her with an accident means something. And when that same word accident shows up 27 years later as the official explanation for his current wife's disappearance, that's not a coincidence I know how to dismiss. Federal investigators have his boat. They have the FLIR camera at FBI Quantico. They have GP's data contradicting his story. They have his AI search history. They have forensic evidence from the soulmate. They have the dinghy. They have Dina from Lynette's family. They have a court document from 1999 in which his first wife described being threatened with an accident. They've been working this 7 days a week for 3 months, and they just released body cam footage of the seizure of his boat. I think about Darlene, 76 years old, waiting in Florida. I think about Carly, who watched this coming and couldn't stop it. I think about Elizabeth Hoseth, who got out in 1999 and signed that document, who tried to tell the world who he was, who maybe never imagined that 27 years later her words would land in the middle of a federal murder investigation. And I think about Lynette. On the water she loved, in the life she chose, who deserved so much better than whatever happened on that boat. TikTok, Brian, if you have any information about what happened to Lynette Hooker, contact the Royal Bahamas Police Force at 2423-224444. Go to tips.fbi.gov or download the CJIS Anonymous Tips app. Both investigations remain active. Brian Hooker has not been formally charged with any crime. He denies all wrongdoing. All individuals are presumed innocent unless formally charged and convicted in a court of law. Everything in this video is based on publicly available court documents and reporting from the Daily Mail, News Nation, Fox News, CBS News, and ABC News as of July 3rd, 2026. Subscribe if you're following this case